Perfect. So let's just start with a little introduction of your professional experience and how you ended up being the senior software engineer at MarleySpoon.
Yeah, actually, I'm right now working as a senior software engineer for MarleySpoon, and I joined back in February. But before that, I graduated in 2015 from FAST. And after that, I worked for almost 3 years for Square63, and then had the opportunity to work for KeepTruckin for another whole year. And then I moved to Estonia for joining my partner up here, who was working in here, Estonia. And then I was working there at Rangeforce as a senior software engineer for another whole year. After that, I got the opportunity to be part of MarleySpoon team, which is a very exciting company to be in. And yeah, right now I'm working over here in the backend team with Ruby on Rails.
That's perfect. Well, like I said before in our internal discussion, I feel like, you are definitely a gem in the Ruby world, because I mean, having a girl, the Rails girl in the community is very hard to find. I mean, Ruby on Rails engineers themselves are very hard to find, and that is why I refer to them as gems. But you are definitely a bigger gem, honestly, I would say. But it's very nice. Like I honestly don't get to see a lot of women in the Ruby community, and I am very glad that you are part of that finally.
Yeah, it's definitely exciting, and I would say the Ruby overall gems in the industry is lesser, like not only in Pakistan but also like worldwide as well. So yeah, and being girl in there is kind of a little harder, but yeah, I would really want and really love if more girls community can just come in here and be the part of this great community that we have.
Well, thank you. So one of the questions I always ask the speakers is that what made you choose Ruby and Ruby on Rails?
I would say it's one of my projects back I did in for my one of my semester courses, in which I actually liked Rails, working on it, and then it actually made me go towards the web development side of the industry. And there, when I joined Square63, that's the company who had been completely working on Rails and has many amazing people working in there, many amazing mentors. So when I was learning it through, I really like the way it is, and I really like the power it's giving to just make everything pretty smoother, and it's more relatable about how I think and how it makes me feel to accomplishment when I do things in that. And I would say that overall in my whole career, I had been lucky enough to have those side of amazing projects and those amazing things that I can explore within Rails that never let me leave the language.
That's great. So we will just start with your live demo. Just wanted to say, Sheikh Hawar Qayyum says, proud to see you. Shiza Naveed is also saying, so proud of you. So I guess we're all very proud of you. Over to you. So you can just start with the live demonstration and your presentation. I'll turn off my video, and all the live viewers can drop in their questions and we'll answer them after the presentation session.
Perfect. Thank you, Sabrina. So hi, everyone. If you have, again, any questions related to any demo, and if I'm not able to answer them, you can always hit me up on LinkedIn. I have given a link here as well. So sorry for that. So I hope you all can see my screen, right? Can you guys see my screen? Okay, perfect. Thank you for that again, Sabrina. So my topic would be a little related to GraphQL, as you all know, but first I want to give you a background how and when I discovered about GraphQL. It was a time when I joined the MarleySpoon. I was shocked to see the complexity GraphQL can simply solve. As you might are aware that that in systems which have hierarchically complex problems, it's not very easy to serve the clients, right? It's a very complex problem, and we have to have a lot of endpoints to serve our data and easing our flow. But when we are having GraphQL, everything is just so seamless, and it's just like getting what we need, sending what we want to send. So that motivated me to come here and talk about it today as well. And the next question is, why did I choose this topic, right? Because there are many more topics out there. I could have talked about them. But I, like many of you, have suffered the complexity of working with traditional REST clients, where we have to add more and more complexity layers to just serve our applications. And I wanted to come here and share with you all that you can all actually simplify your work by really using this simple tool. And I wish that this small presentation or webinar would make your life easier and can have this basic implementation done in your project, and you all can benefit about it. So I would say enough talking about why I'm here, how I'm here. Let's go into and talk about what our topic would be about. It would be integrating GraphQL with Ruby on Rails. And this is how our webinar roadmap would look like. First, I have divided in pretty six sections. First, I'll talk about what is actually a GraphQL, and then I would talk about how and what is a typical REST application, which I'm sure many of you would be familiar of. And then I would talk about the potential drawbacks that we usually face in using the REST architecture. Then we'll talk about how things are with GraphQL, and what are the basic operations that GraphQL provide. And after this theoretical knowledge, I would go dive in and work on a proof of concept application with you all. And I hope you guys have benefit from it. So let's go ahead and see. Yeah, now the next question is, what is GraphQL, right? What is this whole hype about? So GraphQL is nothing but just a query language for APIs and runtime for filling those existing queries from our data, right? So it is basically that simple principle that you get what you want, no less, no more. So, but the question is that how does it came into existence, right? How was it born? How did we know that this is a thing? So for that, we would have to go a little bit back in the history and see why and where it came from. So in 2012, first I would try to say you about why and why was it even developed in the first place. In 2012, Facebook was trying to build their newsfeed implementation on mobile. You know, for Facebook, it's not just a simple retrieving a story, right? It's right. Not just like who wrote it, who commented on it, what it says, list of comments, and who liked it, who gave an emoji or whatever. But every story is interconnected, it's nested, it's recursive, right? We know, every one of us uses Facebook, right? So the existing APIs back then in 2012 in Facebook were not designed to allow the developers to expose a rich newsfeed-like experience on mobile, because they didn't have a hierarchical nature, which would let the developers take what they need and get what they want. But rather, it was more of a complex architecture at back in there. So in 2012, Facebook decided that they needed to build this new newsfeed API in order to build that whole mobile app. This is where and when GraphQL came into shape. And it was then internally used by Facebook. And that's the power of GraphQL that they use. It allowed the developers to actually reduce the network usage by utilizing the data fetching capabilities of GraphQL. I would come to this point that what is actually data fetching capabilities in the later slides, but this is the power, that the word I'll be saying again and again, to get what you need, no more, no less. So, and then after that, in 2015, it became the part of our open source community. And we have many language and integrations that we can do on. So the next question is, how and what is a typical REST application? I'm pretty sure that we all are familiar that how a REST application is worked and is served. we end up having many URLs, right? We end up having every URL to support an endpoint and to support a request. For instance, in this basic example that I have shown over here, that we have a simple authors library, okay? And there is a REST API that is on the top of it. And every client, irrespective it's mobile, it's API or whatever, they always query a specific endpoint to get a request, right? So for instance, if they have to fetch list of all authors, they would fetch it by get/authors. And if they want to fetch a specific book, then they would do it for another endpoint, right? And so for goes for, sorry for that, for creating a new author and for updating a new author, every request has a new separate endpoint. So what happens in this, right? What happens when we do this sort of architecture? What potential problems that we run into? So for that, I would classify it as these are two situations that we run into. I'm pretty sure that it would have happened to all of you too as well, because it had happened to me quite much. And I would classify these two situations as either we underfetch or we overfetch. So these are two terms. What do these two terms mean, right? So in underfetching, we do not fetch everything that we need in one request. For instance, we need to fetch a list of, we need to fetch a single author with all the details, like all the books he has written, all the chapters he has written, and everything like that. But the request that we usually get, the response, sorry, we usually get from there is not complete. We have just chapter IDs. Sorry for that. So for that, we have to make another request, like to fetch all the chapters in order to fulfill this query need that we have. So this is one of the situations in which we underfetch. One request is not enough to do everything. The other situation that usually happens more often, I would say, that we overfetch the data. We, for instance, in this basic example I have given is that we just needed author names for, maybe just a search query, just a search dropdown that we needed a list of author names that we can search on. But the simple endpoint that we have developed would have those book details as well. We don't need them. Why we have it, Why are we having a network extra usage when we can avoid it, right? So these are two of the major things that we usually face when we are working with REST. So how does this GraphQL actually mitigates these old problems? I would better explain it in a slide. So this is how GraphQL looks like. Every request, either get, either post, either patch, anything goes through just one single endpoint, no matter how many clients they are, right? It does not have a bunch of URLs just loaded to get the data, to create the data. It's just one single endpoint. Thus, it's not simple enough. We request the data and we get the data that we need. And that's the specific beauty of GraphQL, as I have been saying again and again. Since we are now familiar that there is one endpoint that is used for every operation that we do over here rather than many. So we'll jump in and try to learn that how these request kinds are segregated, how creating request is different from an updating or from getting request or read request. So for that, I'll dive into operations, GraphQL operations. I would say that there are three kinds of operations, but for this webinar, I will just be talking about two of the basic ones. One is queries and the other one is mutations. So in queries, what happens is it's a simple mechanism for reading data. Like, for instance, in this basic example, we want to search a book, right? And we can search a book either by the name, and we only want its title and author, and that's it. We do not need any more details of how many chapters it has or whatever. We just skip that and we don't get that. So we don't, have that same problem of fetching that we had previously in the REST APIs. So then there is like mutations. Mutations is a mechanism for creating and updating data. Like we want to create a book, we give its specific parameters that we need, and that's it. We just create it. And there is another third type that I was mentioning is it's a subscription operation in which actually every data is listened But for this basic proof of concept thingy, I didn't add that for this webinar, but we can obviously, we can always research on it and try to learn about it more. So I would say that there is a lot of theoretical knowledge that we can go on talking about, and there's a lot that we can share. But now I would like to honor the practical knowledge, and let's get whatever the basics we learn into actual practice. So for that, I have this basic proof of concept application in which I would be talking about a really very basic example in which an author can have many books and each book can have multiple chapters. So we would go ahead, create a whole project from scratch and try to see how we can use queries and mutations that we have discussed. So you guys can do this whole process with me if you like. And also I have uploaded this whole project on GitHub as well. So I would give that the link at the end as well for you all to see and for all to experience the code out there. So let's go ahead and try to create all these things. So I'll just go ahead, try to use every bullet one by one. And sorry again, and try to go ahead and create our Rails project in the start. So let's do that. I would just use this basic Rails generation command, which would run and create the application for us. So we would just go here. And I would just run a bundle in order to make sure everything is executed. Yes, it is. So the next step after that is that we would be creating our Rails models. As I mentioned, that there would be 3 simple models, nothing complex. So let's start it one by each line. So I going to generate an author model. An author model is just like 2 basic fields, an email and a name, nothing complex. Then we would have another model named as book, and it would have the basic like name, description, and the author that it belongs to, a simple association, right? Sorry, I missed an R in the start. Then I would use another simple generator for creating another model of chapters. And let's do that. I'm doing nothing more than copy pasting these simple commands right here. And I think our basic data layer would be set once we migrate it. So let's migrate it, right? And that's it. We can also check everything in there in the Rails console. Let's see what an author is. We would have to have account. Author is simply set it up. Chapter is set it up as well. Book as well. So our data layer is set. Now let's go ahead. I would say that this part does miss the association. So I'll quickly go ahead in the code and try to add these associations. Give me a second, please. So yeah, I hope you all can see this one as well, this screen. So let's go ahead and try to add this associations of books. Author has many books, right? And book has many chapters. Sorry for that. So I just added these basic associations. I would just commit it in a second so we have everything clear for us. Okay, so from now we have everything set it up for us. So the next step that I want to do is, now the data layer is set, next step I want to do is actually fill our data. So for that, we can now obviously go ahead and have in Rails console every specific authors and books, but for simplicity, I'll just use this basic script that I have written and use the faker gem for fitting all the data for us. So the first step first, going ahead, adding a faker gem in our gem file. And yeah, running a simple bundle install, nothing super complex. It's something new, so I'm not going into detail of what is happening over here, but it's just like adding the data. And after that, the next step is seeding the data, which is like creating 2 authors, having every author having 3 books and every book having 2 chapters. So I'll just copy this whole thing and add it in the seed. By the way, you can always get this all data or like all this presentation along in the GitHub as well. So you don't have to remember this all thing. So I'll just go ahead, seed my file. And yeah, that's it. We'll go here again and just try to check that everything is working fine. So let's get a book count. And we would see we have this book and this book has an author. Yeah, association works. And this author has chapters. Everything works. And this chapters first has a book and then author as well. So I would say our data layer is set and we are done with the basic parts of this application, which was the same as you would be familiar with. So the next step is what we are going to learn. It is about how we can have GraphQL and how we can have the basics of initializers in our application. So I'll start up with just simply installing the Rails gem of GraphQL. It's one of the gems that this GraphQL has provided. And I'll just go here, copy the simple guide, install the gem. And yeah, it's off, and just run the bundle install after it. And that's pretty much it. And then we would run this generator, which would do and generate a couple of files for us. Let's see what these files are. I'm just committing it so we have everything neat up there. So let's go ahead, try to generate these basic things that the GraphQL has added. So as you can see, it adds a lot of things for us, right? It adds a whole new folder, changes in gem files, another route change, another controller. So I'll just dive a little into what it has generated for us. So as I mentioned, it did generate like the basic GraphQL folder, a mutation folder. As I mentioned, it's all about creating and updating things. And then we have a types folder. And a type is basically a way of querying data, and it has different it's like objects, and they are the ones that are used. It also generates a couple of base files over here. You can get into more detail if you want to. It's pretty much good documented, but I would like to come here and talk about 2 basic things that are pretty important. One is the schema file. You can assume that this schema file is like a holy grail file, right? So everything over here is the starting point. It is where all the mutations / creations of the data take place. And then we have queries where all the reading of the data takes place. So it tries to load up all the mutations that are in these types. So it is essentially tries to load up this thing, right? So if I go here and I see this, it tries to load a mutation, which is just creating this basic simple field. And then it has a query class as well, which tries to have and query this simple test field for now. So that's it. That's the 2 points that we have to go dive in, and I would come back to do that in a moment. But yeah, for the basic initialization, it does this. It also adds this GraphQL controller for us, which has pretty much ensuring and executing how things are working. But I wouldn't dive deep into it because that's not the webinar part that I'd like to cover today. And it also added one route that I would like to mention over here. It added this post GraphQL route, and as and mentioned, and the requests all that come over here, I'll actually route it to GraphQL execute endpoint. So far, I think right now we have everything set up, and we can actually go ahead and run our simple files. But we have a problem over here. We don't have a good visualization right now. I'll go into that in the next slide, but I forget to tell you about these generators. So we all are, I hope we all are familiar with how Rails generators work. So if we go and check these Rails generate command, we will see that there is a whole bunch of GraphQL generators that this initialization has added. So we would use a few of them in the coming slides. So that's why I thought that it's good that I mention it over here for you guys. But that's all it did. It added a couple of generators for us by default. So let's go ahead and try to improve our visualization. For that, there is one gem, which is GraphQL Rails. It adds a nice endpoint for nice mounting for the endpoint for our queries. So it's nothing complex. I'll just go here, add another gem. Yeah, I'm sorry, it's all about gems right now, but these are the basics that we need, right? So we'll go ahead, do a simple bundle install, nothing complex, and then we would just go ahead over here and try to copy it in our routes. This is actually already added to the previous initializer. It's the same thing, nothing complex, but we will map these endpoints to what our application is. So as I mentioned in my previous slides, that we will be using a post request to /GraphQL. So I'll just update it to here, and I would let this part to be actually GraphQL execute. Nothing complex, I hope over here, right? If there's a Rails environment, mount this to this endpoint, and this is actually a post request that goes to this controller. So let's go ahead and try to run an application. So I'll just go ahead and try to run a simple Rails server. We haven't written any queries and mutations yet, but we do have these defaults that I showed you. So we will try to see if we do get a test field, right? So I go over here, I try to hit my endpoint. It is GraphQL. I hope it works. Yes, it did. So this is a pretty simple UI that we have. We have this documentation explorer over here as well, where we can see what queries we have and what mutations we have. Right now, we don't have anything major over there, just like the test ones that's created. So we go here and we see that there is a test query that is over here, and same goes for the mutation as well. So now let's go ahead and try to do a very simple query. So how do we write this query that we want to do? We first write what our intention is. We want to do a query, and what is the name of the query? It's a test field, as mentioned over here. Just remember one thing: every snail case converts into a camel case. So every underscore goes away, it's camel case, and we just try to run it. And that's it. We are able to have our first simple query returned to us. But that's how simple it is. But I'll now dig deep in and see how we can actually do our next queries. So we have tried our default queries. Everything is working till here. Let's go and see what queries are. I have been saying this word quite now. What is query, right? So a query is a way to read the data. It is an action by which we can fetch the data. And I would be using two other terminologies in here. One would be field, which is like, you can think of it like as an attribute which GraphQL will return, and it can be string, it can be integer, Boolean, or even a custom object. But every field is essentially a function. This is very important. Every field is essentially a function. And the next thing is what object is. Object is, like you can assume, it's like an instance of the class inside that function that we have. We'll get this into practical implementation in the next step, but these are two basic things that we have to remember. So let's go ahead and create a simple query a simple query where we are fetching all authors and return the simple author's name, ID, and a book count. So first we will go ahead and try to create a GraphQL object. This is one of the generators that I was mentioning that we have to use, GraphQL object generator. So I'll just go ahead, paste this command in our console, and what this command would do, it would actually, let me actually get it practical. I'm just committing it again for smoother things. So what this generator would do, it would actually create a type with name as author. That's it. It would just create a new type with an author name, and we can go ahead and see we have a new type here. It's just like Rails generators we use for scaffolding or creating models, controllers, and so on and so forth. So now this is the part where our knowledge would come in, right? So what we need from here, what we need from here is just three simple fields, a name, an ID, and a book count. So I'll go ahead and start by writing just a simple mapping. So we need a field. You can assume that field is essentially a GraphQL object attribute, which we use for mapping the characteristics or attributes that we want to return. So for this, first like argument is field, and then we have the field that we want to return. In our case, it's ID. Then is the type of it, and then a simple constraint. It can be null or it cannot be null. So it's ideally just three things: field, the thing that we want to return, the type, and simple constraint. As the name can be null as well. So I just added null as true. So what happens is this actually maps exactly to our database layer. But if something like we have a book count, which isn't mapped to anything, so if we write a book count, which is an integer, and it can be null as well, but this is not mapped to anything, right? We do not have an author attribute as book count. So for that, we have to define a method, book count. And that's how GraphQL knows that this is mapped to this. Nothing complex, just simple mapping. And this is where our all logic comes in. We just have to fetch the object, like the instance of author, get it books, and get the count. And pretty much that's it, right? So one thing it can, like I would try to talk about is that these types that are returned can be these basic scalar types as well, but these can also be an objects as well, which we will dig a little bit deep in the upcoming slides, but this is like very basic things that we need to do. So let's go ahead. We have done the pretty much things. Let's go ahead and see if we have these queries over here. No, we don't, right? Because we have not included it in the basic file, the base file that I was talking about. So how do we get to that? This is the schema that we had. So it's a query. We are trying to fetch the data. So we would go into this query type. You can see this test field right now coming up. So we would just remove this and try to add the endpoint that we are now trying to fetch. So every endpoint essentially that you want to fetch comes in here. So you have this You want to fetch the list of authors, it comes in here. So we have this /authors, and similar way, but like we defined our previous author types, we are going to add a field over here as well. So we'll just say field. What would be the field name? Authors. What would be its return type? This is the part that I was mentioning. It would be an array of author type. It would be an array of author type. So we would just go here, try to get this, and we can say it can be not bool, but sorry, null. And that's it. That's all you need to do. But how do GraphQL knows that how this authors is mapped? So it's not a base type. So we would have to have a method over there that would actually perform all that logic for us. So we would define a definition of authors, and that goes with the same everything that we have always been doing. Rails magic author.all. And that's it. That's all we need to do for the basic query, these two basic things, and that's it. Now, after the refresh, we should have it in the query. Yes, we do. We have a list of authors which has these 3 fields. So let's get it into practice. Let's try to query the list of authors. You can see like this, this really nice tips and everything is coming up. It's this by V because we have used this GraphQL Rails gem, which provides us with these things. So it's authors, list of authors. So the next point is, how do we define this list, right? So first we write the simple, what's the name of the query that we want to do, and what's the elements that we want to fetch. We want to fetch an ID, right? We want to fetch a name. We want to fetch a count, book count. Again, camel cases. So that's it. We get our simple queries. And if, like, for instance, we just need the names, we want to, like my example that I was saying, that we just need the names of authors. That's it. We just get the names. We didn't get anything extra. And that's all the beauty of GraphQL is, that we get what we need. We do not get anything extra. We do not get anything less. And that's pretty much it. We are successfully done with our first query. So that was a pretty simple one, right? So we would go into a little bit complexity, add a little bit of nesting in there. So we would now extend this whole query that we had been doing with a list of authors to have the books as well for these authors, right? So we will extend it to one single level in which we would create simple, like we discussed before, a simple GraphQL object generator used for creating a book, and add these basic types. So let's get there. Let's try to create an object. I'm doing nothing, simply copying this line in console. I'm sorry, my neck was a little, throat was a little dry. So let's go ahead, try to look that it has created this book type for us. Pretty simple, right? Just use a generator, it creates a type, and we would just go ahead and add the fields that we need. It has ID, name, and description. Let's go ahead the same way. Field is ID, type would be ID. It can be not null. And then we have another field of name, string. It can be null, and same goes for the description. And it would be a string, and it can be null as well. That's all we needed to do for the authors to be returned. But we wanted all this authors list to be returned in, sorry, this books list to be returned in author. For that, we need to add another field over here because we want to do something like books over here. Like we want the list of books, so we want to do something like that, right? So let's go ahead and try to add another field. Nothing, just simply field. And then we would mention we want the field to be named as books, which would be an array of book type. So it's just like types and then book type, and it won't be null because every author would have a book, right? And yeah, we'll just refresh this page. We will get what, we'll just try to get the book names. That's it. We are done with our basic query, right? I'll just add more fields just for the showing that, sorry, we can retrieve everything that we want from here. Also, one really nice thing that this GraphQL provide is these document explorers where you can see what we're going to get and what's the result at the end. So now we are done with one big query. Now there is one little thing that we can also add. It has nothing complex, just adding another GraphQL object as chapters to actually show you how triple nesting can work, how a hierarchical structure can work. So let's get this going. Sorry again. So let's try to create this basic object for named as chapter and just use this generator. I will go ahead here, try to create this chapter, and it would be sorry, it would be a chapter type, and it would be those same fields that we have, right? I can copy it from the other fields as well that we really do, but I'll just get a short for you. So a field would that's have a name that's named as name. And then we have a string, that's the return type, it can be null. And I would copy it for three things. So we would have an ID, which would be an ID type, and then we would have this chapter had a short description. I know it from here. And that's pretty much it. And now we want to fetch these chapters in the books as well. Like what are the chapters that this book have? Nothing complex, just going here, adding another simple field with the name as chapters like we did for the books and the author. Its return type would be types, colon, chapter type, and it can be not null, sorry. And then we would go here, try to refresh this, and we see inside a book, we have another field that is named as chapters. So let's go ahead, try to create the chapters over here with a simple ID name and a short description. And that's pretty much it. We can do everything by just this simple thing. But what if we want to return the author name inside the chapters? It would be, again, nothing complex, because I'm just showing it for, for your familiarity. So we would add another, sorry, we would add another field name as author name, and its type would be string, which would be returned, and it can be null as well that we want. So I'm sorry, I'm writing it in the wrong file. It should be in the chapters because I want to return the name of the author each chapter has. I know it's not very much practical that we would have it, but just for the sake of concepts, I'm adding it. So we have a simple field which is mapped to a method, and that's it. We would have the object like we had in the previous one for this, and for this chapter object, it has many books. This chapter belongs to one book, and this book has one author and it has one name. And that's it. That's what we need to do for going back in the hierarchy. We came from up to top, but we can go from top to up as well. So just author name. And that's it. We have the author name as well. So that was all about the queries. We can simply do, I have also attached a screenshot of this that we simply did right now, but nothing complex in there. I hope it was pretty easier. And then there is another query which we can do, which is like fetching a single author. It won't be complex at all as well. It would be just adding another field in our query type and try to fetch those attributes from there. So how do we do it? We actually go in this basic query and we try to have the author with a type, like this would be ideally the request that we would be getting in a REST application, right? So we would just go here, try to get another field, and the field name would be author. This would be the one that we would fetch in the query, and its type would be author type, and it would be null as false. And now for this, the important thing is that we do need an argument. So we will create a block over here, add the argument as ID, simple the return type, and we would have this required as true because a single author cannot be returned without an ID, right? So we have to have this method to be mapped this author to be mapped to a method like we have for the authors. So it's simply the author, and that's it. We would just have this author method would actually get an ID as well because it's a required parameter. And then we would go here, author.find ID. And that's pretty much it that we need to do for fetching a single author as well. We find the corresponding Rails method, a block, and a simple field. And now if we execute this, just we have to add the ID to the endpoint, and that's it. So let's try this. So we have author, and let's try to fetch this author one, ID one, and that's it. We have a single author as well. I hope it's pretty simple. Yeah. So let's go ahead, and now I would work into mutations. So mutations are, as I mentioned, it's a simple way of creating and updating data. And the terminologies that we will be using in it are arguments, fields, and a resolve method. What are these three things? Arguments are typically required. They are like creating and modifying data fields like name, ID, name, email, etc., etc. You can think of it like strong parameters that we have in Rails, which whitelist what's coming, what's right, what's wrong, and field is simply the type by which it would be returned. And a resolve method that is very, very compulsory is actually a method where we execute all the active record commands, and it takes arguments, it returns the field. So this is the method that takes both these things. So let's go ahead, let's try to create the mutations. So I would just follow this whole thing one by one. I would create a new file, name as create author in the mutation folder, and I would add and explain these steps one by one. So let's go ahead. We have this, we created a new file named as create author from here, and we would create this class, which would be inherited from the base mutation class, which we have been provided by the initializer. So let's go ahead and let's try to copy this line, and let's get it up here. Pretty much that's it. And then we have this whole mutation created for us. So we will begin by describing what this mutation does. So I'll write a description that it creates authors. And the next thing that we talked is arguments. So we would add a couple of arguments that mutation would need for the creation. So it would be a name, which type would be string, which we are expecting it to be, and it would be required. Another argument for creating an author would be email of type string. It would be required again, and that's all the arguments that we need. So the next part is what would this return? It would return upon creations these two fields, author and errors. So we'll add these fields, simply field author with a type of author type, and it can be null as well, and same goes for a field which is an authors, and it would be a list of strings, an array of strings. We'll simply use arrays or errors over here, and that's it. And the third most important, as I mentioned, is the resolve method, which will perform all the active record part in it and create these mutation for us. So it would take these two arguments, which is name and email, and does all that part for us. So what we will do over here, simple Rails way, we'll try to create the author with these field, name as name, email as email, and then we would, like we simply do in REST, we would try to have author.save, and if author is saved, we return a specific hash. If author is not saved, we return another specific hash, and that's it. So as I mentioned, every hash would be returned by the fields. This method would return actually both of these field arguments in them. So first we would have author. If we have author saved, we return the author that we created over here. And the errors in this case would be of the return type empty. And if there were errors, we would return author as nil. And errors would be simple Rails thing, author.errors.full messages. And that's it. That's all the mutation is about. We add the arguments, we add the fields, and then we add this method. Everything should be good enough by now, and we can actually run it and see our mutations. Again, we cannot see it because we do not have it in our base file. So let's go ahead and add this mutation over here, right? It's the simple that we did over there as well in the query, simply like that. We would have a field that named as create underscore author, and it would be mapped to a mutation that we have in the mutations. Its name is create author, and that's it. That's how we would have our mutations. So let's go ahead. I would have done some problem over here. Let's see. It would be probably the types that we have. It would be the types. Let's see. Let me double check in over here. So we have this field mutation and oh, just a second. So it's probably I would have somewhere written around type. The type is an author. So I would go here and see. See what field it is, and this type is types of author, and then we have a string, and then we have a mutation, which is mutations create author. Do not read property types of undefined. So I'm sorry, probably I would have, it says the mutations create author is not defined. So I have a mutations and it's called create author. Guys, it is supposed to be happening when you're presenting like that. So I'm sorry for that. Just give me a second. It would be a type. These are the basic type that I'm trying to return. is the mutation that we have. Let's for a second go here. I think probably something is wrong with the type I'm using over here. So we have to have the types of author type. It is supposed to be like this, types of author type, and null of is false. And then we have a field error. Let me go ahead, and I'm really sorry, guys. I am not pretty sure that why is the reason it's crashing right now. So just give me a second. I would try to check it. So we have a mutation. Mutation must define at least one. So I would try to revert it to the previous one. And yeah, this works. It means something is wrong in the mutation that we have created. So we have a mutations, and we have create author, we have a description argument, and this would be a types in author type. The return type is this, null is false, and it's the string. Yep. And this has nothing to do, and it's a test field. Let's go ahead and try to add this mutation that I was having, and it will just be a simple field where it's trying to create this mutation. Something is wrong with the name of how I have given it. Mutations, create author. Oh, I'm probably, the field is create author, and the mutation that I have defined is create author as well. I have added this field. I am just so sorry I'm not able to get this. I have this create underscore author as my file name inside the mutations, and everything is over here as simple types, author type. I'm pretty sure it's just like one S or this thing that I missed, but I would go ahead and try to see what I have missed. So it would be in the mutation type, I have to go here and add this mutation. I'm sure enough. This is one of the books type that we created. And either I can spend some time on it, but I think we are running out of time for this. So I have this one application which I like hosted it on the GitHub for you guys. So I can go ahead and try to load that up so we can continue our demo. Otherwise, I would say that it would get late for all of you to have it. And I can come in with the end that what was the problem and I can share it. So there is another application. I hope that's running. So this is the one where we have this simple create mutation written for us. So I'll go ahead over here and I'll try to explain the code, how and what mutations we are doing. So this is the one that I have hosted, so it wouldn't be a problem. So this was a simple mutation query that we had, and it was trying to resolve up to the method as we mentioned, and I added this into the base mutation. I have added this into this mutation type, and that was the point that I was trying to do over there as well. So probably we can go ahead and try to create a mutation over here and try to go ahead with the demo, and I can actually look into it later and post you all about it. So if we go ahead into the next slide, it was basically creating a simple mutation, which we talked about. So it's nothing complex, just adding mutation at the start of it, followed by a similar way that we do, and that would be a create author, and it would then need an input of what parameters that we want to send in. It could be name. For instance, we want to create an author with a name Mehreen and email as and this would actually returns us two kind of things. It would be either author with a name and an ID, let's suppose, or it would be errors. And that's all we need to do for creating another author to our list. And that's what this endpoint was executing us for that as well. So there was another mutation that I was thinking to go ahead and that was nothing major than updating a simple mutation. And it is essentially the same thing that we have done for create mutations. And I have since this demo application. So I would just came over the code, and since we are running out of time as well, so I would not take much of your time and try to go into that detail. So we have this other mutation that is update. I'm sorry, I'm in the wrong project. So this is the update author. It is simply like that, the simple that we already created together for the create one, where we have the fields, the arguments, and a simple resolver, which is trying to find an ID for the mutation. It has the required ID parameter as well, and it tries to update and send a response back for authors or errors in either case. And that's pretty much that's the mutation is doing. And we have also added this mutation over here in this mutation update or author. And that's pretty much it. That's the two things that we need to add, and we can simply query it over here with a simple parameter, and that is we would update its query to be update author, which would take the name as one, as we could not update the email from the arguments that we have supplied, and we want to update the ID 4. And maybe for instance, we want to update this name to Mehreen. And yeah, that's it. So I'm really sorry for the part that this has some small problem, but I'll try to fix it while you guys are asking questions. But this was basically the simpler way, but I'm glad that we were able to complete it all in the right time. So this is a simple author mutation that has been done. And I was mentioning in the start, these are the resources which are kind of helpful. And this is the demo application that's also has all the code written, and this also has this presentation attached to it for one-to-one steps that if you want to go ahead and look in. And these are the queries and mutations. So that all the resources that would be helpful if you want to read more in. And at the end, I would really like to thank you all for being here. And I would apologize for the small inconvenience that's being caused. But yeah, if you have any questions, then please shoot now.
All right, so thank you, Mehreen, for the very in-depth live demo. So not a problem with the issues. I'm sure developers are honestly used to it by now. One thing I was thinking was in, what we can do as a challenge here, because I mean, people were sending in their solutions. Whoever gets it right will probably just get a RubyConf merch. So let's treat it as that way. Moving on, let's answer some of the questions. So we do have a lot of questions that we had coming in during the live stream. The first question was from Moiz Ahmed. How do we manage authentication and authorization with GraphQL?
Okay, so actually, the thing is that we have these, we can simply integrate a device into it as well as the API-based integrations. We have to have because every request is, you can assume that GraphQL controller is just like in any other controller. There is always like an application controller at the top of it. And you can always add the association right in there, as we do in device or as we do in like JWT tokens or any kind of thing. So that remains the same. So the authentication part is like that. And then if we talk a little bit, I would deviate from the question. If we talk about how we would handle like roles and all those parts where we have multiple roles and every role has certain set of permissions and all those things, they are still handleable. And it's all about defining an extra above layer graph before GraphQL, because GraphQL controller cannot be directly hit, right? It goes through a base controller and we can always add a layer of complexity. So I would say it would be the same. And that's a nice thing. I would like to actually enhance this project a little bit onto that as well.
For sure, for sure. Well, thank you for answering that. We did have another question from Adnan Mohal. He was asking, can we call here a method defined in the model? I'm not sure where he asked that, but if he can kind of like specify, Adnan, if you're watching, please help us out with kind of clarifying. Yeah. So there's that.
Probably he would be asking regarding the base classes that we can add. Every field which is not mapped directly can be added as a sync method as well. But in case if we want to have every field another method, like if, for instance, I'll give a very basic example, that if there is a field that is, for instance, email, but in the case of GDPR, we cannot actually send the emails back. So we would have to change it to statics or something else. So we can actually map that same thing in a function. So in the mutations or in the queries, we can define those mutations. In the types, we can define the resolvers and the mutations. It's kind of the thing. But if you can clarify your question a little bit more, that would be ideal.
For sure. Well, Adnan, if you are still watching the live stream, please do let us know and we will answer your question. Moving on, we had a question from Zahid Bhatti. Can we use GraphQL inputs as body parameters in an API?
Which API? That's the question, because GraphQL provides, GraphQL is a way of exposing things, right? So it is a way of exposing our data of what we need and what we want. So yeah, if you're talking here about a third-party API, yes, obviously you can expose that up. It's just like, you can assume it as like a simple encapsulation of everything by this simple layer, which provides us with the complexity that we can query simple fields and do the same operations that we do with the usual REST API.
Right, perfect. And then we had a couple of problem resolutions from Pratik, Muhammad Yunus, Afzal, Muhammad Naveed, Abu Bakr. He also sent in his two thoughts of what he thought was wrong. So let's see who wins. And whoever wins will get the RubyConf merch for sure. We will be posting whatever was wrong in the demo in the comment box. So don't worry about that, guys. Okay, we do have a very threefold question from Mohsin Jamshed. So his first question is, how would we expose this GraphQL API publicly and authorize and authenticate the users through JWT?
Okay, that's a very interesting question. So, as I mentioned, this was part of the previous question that I tried to answer and add this authentication and authorization in that. But I would try to restate everything again for you because it's a simple endpoint. It's a simple one single controller endpoint, and you can still add layer of authentication, authorization, permissions on the top of it. It's similar to that. It's just like a basic way of querying data. It is not that you can also assume it like this, that I'm not saying that REST is bad. I'm saying that these both things go hand in hand. Like you can take Facebook example. Facebook doesn't have everything in GraphQL, right? It has only the major parts in GraphQL, which are internally communicated, but it doesn't have like the third-party integrations in GraphQL, because if they give us the power to exploit Facebook, we will do that, right? So they have still the REST endpoint. So I would say they are not like separately, they can go hand in hand together very good. And these are, we can add all the things that we want to on the top of it. And it would be a great challenge. Maybe I would definitely like to extend my project for that as well and add these basic layers for all the questions that you guys have been answering.
For sure. Well, thank you. So question number 2, also from Mohsin, was how do we solve eager loading operation from bottom association to up, like you accessed author name in the chapter?
It's the same. It's Rails inside, you know. You can still use all the associations or eager load things that you want to do right in those methods, because in that definition of definition, whatever the method name is, everything inside is Rails. As I was mentioning again and again, everything inside is Rails. It's just mapping. Everything inside is Rails. You can do anything you want to inside those.
All right. So his third question, also from Mohsin, which is probably my favorite question, he is asking, how did you manage to get a job in Germany? And from parenthesis under the hood, how can we do the same? So for the parenthesis part, probably we will answer it under the hood, but definitely you can let us know, Mehreen, like how did you manage to get a job in Germany?
I would just say that I have been lucky enough. Because to be honest, I have never applied for a job. I won't lie over here. I would say LinkedIn. Make your LinkedIn powerful. Recruiters will reach you. It's just about a good LinkedIn. It's just about having the best appearance of what you do, because I'm sure all of us did like create 1,000 things. But it's just about mentioning those things, highlighting your profile, adding a better headline. And that's all about it. Like, to be honest, for me, it was recruiter reaching me out on LinkedIn and being there.
Agreed. I do feel like apart from, I mean, yes, there are other like job portals like Rosie, Indeed, but what LinkedIn can do for you, I don't think other platforms can. And on LinkedIn, it's kind of like now me talking about for example, it's sort of like a marketing point of view. Even like, for example, we do search engine optimization. So we need to optimize every single thing. It's kind of like the same thing in resumes, and it's pretty much the same thing on LinkedIn. Like you just mentioned, on LinkedIn, you need to have like, the exact precise, you can say, title that you are looking for. It kind of helps you get recognized because your profile is technically optimized. So that's one thing. And I think we were talking about this in our internal discussion as well, that, whatever you're doing, just writing that you're working in a certain firm is not enough, because when recruiters are looking at your profile, they're definitely interested in what you are doing over there. So I do think that's a very important point. So we have another question from Abdul Munam Jat. How can we use context in GraphQL? For example, if we want to use application session in GraphQL for some purpose, then we have to pass it via context.
Yeah, the context passing is actually possible in GraphQL, and we can actually pass the context, but we would have to make the changes in the GraphQL controller for that, because as I didn't get into the details of what the controller was doing and what those all parts were doing, but I'm pretty sure the documentation is very well documented, and I have mentioned also a couple of resources for that in which you can actually dive in and see how you can actually pass the context. But we do have a user and all those things inside that we can access. So I would say that there would be modifications required, but it's something that we can definitely achieve.
All right. So let's answer a couple of more questions and then we will wrap up. Probably our live viewers will be a bit, busy and they have to get on with the weekend. So, so Adnan Mughal did actually respond to his earlier question that he raised. Thank you, sure. Let me explain a bit. For example, when you need an author's books count, you defined a method book count. Can we define that method in the model? Maybe author.rb and call it there?
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay.
But the point, actually the whole point of adding this into the specific types is that that's we also end up doing. We also end up accumulating our models with a lot of data that we might not need, because books count might not be a thing that we need in all models, right? It might we just need for this endpoint. So we shouldn't clutter the models that much. It's also a way of extracting the data from the data layer of models and putting it out where we need it. So if there is something that is used by 10 models, good idea. Let's put it in the right place. But we might need to actually, it might not be directly mapped. We might need to have the same method and have call that method inside that definition. So we would have to check which way works, because to be honest, GraphQL, I would say, is a recent love of me. So I have been experimenting with it as well. And yeah, that's a nice question.
All right. So thank you for answering that. We have another question from Absar Mushtaq. He is asking, how can we integrate third-party API like booking.com to GraphQL for fetching and parsing data?
Third-party API, what do you mean by parsing and fetching data over here exactly? Like you want inside a specific query, you want to get another third party? Do you mean that by this question? If yes, then yeah, probably we can do that, but I would not really advise you to do that inside those mutations or those queries. I would advise you to please have a service object for that. Do not clutter these like controllers. Have a service object, call that service object over in wherever the place you want to call it. In those methods, ideally, you will be able to call it, because there is where you can do all the Rails magic, right? So, but in theory, in a service object, if it's working, if everything is good enough in that service object, calling it inside the definition methods is nothing. It's Rails.
Perfect. So let me see if we have any more questions. Okay, so we do have two more, last two guys, and then we will wrap up the session. So again, from Mohsin, he said, thank you, Mehreen and Sabrina, for all the answers. The last one, if you see any con, a single one in the GraphQL approach.
I would have to reiterate back to how Facebook uses it. It gives too much of the power to the clients. It might not be the right approach when we are doing like the third party. When we are exposing our APIs to third party, it gets very good for entry communication. But when we are exposing it third party, we cannot let them have every details. Like we cannot give the IDs to, to everyone out there. We have to keep some information to ourselves. Then it can have a con, yes. But I would say in a general major world, it's a very great tool to use it, and it is pretty new. It's not, the community is not yet very strong, but it is building up, and we all can contribute to build up that great community. But it's an amazing thing, and I really, really hope all you guys can try it and get in love with it like I did.
For sure. So last question of today's session from Mohammed Naeem. He is asking question for Mehreen. What are recruiters looking for? Jobs related to Ruby on Rails. Can you elaborate what they are actually looking for? People based in Pakistan and have similar experience as you have.
I would say they are pretty much looking on how we are actually dividing our one single monolithic into different microservices. It is a problem that I have faced in like two of my companies that I have, worked for, and moreover in previously back in KeepTruckin, we were also facing this problem. So it was one of the things. And then a really strong knowledge about test. In Pakistan, we do not really work on test, but please guys, test. They are really important. Do your functional test. Do learn more about testing and more about how we can actually not push everything in one thing, rather segregated, use services, use all the good practices that we have, try to use CI/CD pipelines. We do not have them very much, so try to use them, try to experiment a little with. And actually, I would really advise try to learn more about what are the good even code reviewing practices. I have this book that I ordered like yesterday. I don't have it on my table, but this is like a good book, which I would really recommend for you all to read. It's about clean coding, and it's a really nice book if you guys want to read it for good code reviews and everything, because these are all small things that do actually contribute to you being a little ahead.
Got it. So just a thought from Mohsin. Thank you for breaking the fact that we do not need React just because it is created by Facebook to work with GraphQL, which is probably a mindset of most of the people in the industry yet. Thanks for the session. So let's call it a session and let's just call it a day. Thank you so much, Mehreen, for taking out so much time for presenting with the live demo. Honestly, in my personal experience, live demos are pretty tricky. So kudos to you. You did amazing, honestly, and I'm sure that our viewers did have a very good time in watching the whole session and the presentation. And I'm sure we answered almost all of the questions. So thank you to you for taking out the time. And thank you just for being such a, a great community member of RubyConf. We really do appreciate it.
Thank you so much, everybody, for listening up to me, because I know it does get hard to listen to anyone for so long. And I really appreciate if you guys can try it. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach to my LinkedIn. I will also add Sabrina to add my LinkedIn in the comments, so you guys can reach out if you want to. And I would upload this on GitHub. I have already uploaded it on GitHub as well for your reference. So please try it out. And yeah, thank you for having me and bearing with me.
All right. Well, thank you guys. Hope you all have a very good weekend, and bye-bye.
Bye.